They had private jets, mansions on 3 continents, bank accounts with more zeros than most of us will ever count in a lifetime. And then it was gone. Not slowly, not gracefully, almost overnight. Today, we're breaking down how real billionaires lost everything, the exact decisions, the exact mistakes, and the moment it all came crashing down. Becoming a billionaire is rare. Fewer than 3,000 people on the planet hold that title. But losing it all after reaching that level? That's even rarer and far more revealing. Because when billionaires go bankrupt, it's almost never because of bad luck. It's almost always the same handful of decisions, repeated across different countries, different industries, and different decades. In the next 10 minutes, we're going to walk through 6 real, documented cases, verified through court records, financial filings, and major news outlets, and break down exactly what went wrong. No speculation, no fiction, just the facts and the lessons hidden inside them. Let's start with mistake number 1, borrowing against a future that never arrives. Brazilian entrepreneur Eike Batista was once the 7th richest person in the world, with a net worth estimated at over $30 billion. He built his empire, EBX Group, across oil, mining, and logistics. The centerpiece of that empire was OGX, an oil company he founded on the promise of massive offshore reserves. Investors poured in money. Banks extended enormous credit lines. Batista himself borrowed heavily, using future production estimates as collateral. But the oil never came out of the ground the way the projections promised. Production targets were missed, again and again. And when the revenue didn't show up, the debt was still due. By 2013, Batista's fortune had collapsed by more than 99%. OGX filed for what was, at the time, the largest corporate bankruptcy in Latin American history. In 2018, Batista was arrested on corruption and market manipulation charges. The lesson here is simple, but it's one of the most ignored rules in finance. Leverage doesn't just amplify your gains, it amplifies your losses at exactly the same speed, especially when that debt is tied to a single, unproven bet. Mistake number 2, putting almost everything into one asset, one company, or one bet. Irish businessman Sean Quinn built a fortune estimated at over €6 billion, one of the largest in Ireland's history, through cement, insurance, and property. But instead of spreading that wealth across different assets, Quinn made an enormous, concentrated bet. He used contracts for difference, a form of leveraged trading, to build a massive position in shares of Anglo-Irish Bank. When the 2008 global financial crisis hit, Anglo-Irish Bank didn't just lose value, it collapsed entirely and had to be nationalized by the Irish government. Because Quinn's position was so large and so leveraged, that single bet was enough to bring down his entire empire. He was declared bankrupt in 2011, with debts exceeding €2 billion. Diversification isn't just advice for small investors reading a finance blog. For billionaires, ignoring it can be catastrophic, because when a concentrated bet fails, the losses don't stay contained. They spread to everything else that person owns. Mistake number 3, crossing legal and ethical lines to keep the illusion of success alive. Texas financier Alan Stanford ran Stanford International Bank, and for years, he was celebrated as one of the wealthiest men in America, with an estimated net worth of over $2 billion. But the foundation of that wealth was fraudulent. Stanford was selling certificates of deposit promising unusually high, guaranteed returns that weren't backed by real, sustainable investments. Regulators later determined it was a Ponzi scheme worth an estimated $7 billion. In 2009, the fraud collapsed. His assets were frozen. His banking empire was dissolved almost overnight. And in 2012, he was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 110 years in prison. This case makes something clear that the others don't. Fraud doesn't just risk a fortune. Once it's uncovered, it doesn't just cost the money, it costs freedom, reputation, and everything that was built alongside it. Mistake number 4, spending as if the income is permanent, even when the business behind it isn't. Patricia Kluge, an American media heiress, built one of the most extravagant estates in the United States, a 9,000 square foot mansion in Virginia, alongside a winery and vineyard business, financed largely through debt. The lifestyle was designed around continued high income and rising asset values. But when the 2008 recession hit, revenue from the winery and related ventures couldn't cover the debt she had taken on to fund that lifestyle. In 2010, her estate went into foreclosure. Her property, her winery, and even personal furnishings were auctioned off publicly to repay creditors. The lesson from this case is one that applies at every income level, just at a bigger scale. A lifestyle built on borrowed money, rather than sustainable cash flow, is a lifestyle built on borrowed time. Mistake number 5, expanding aggressively at the peak of a cycle, assuming the boom will never end. Indian businessman Vijay Mallya, once known as the King of Good Times, built Kingfisher Airlines into one of India's most recognized airline brands. But he expanded the airline rapidly during a period of rising fuel costs and intense price competition, funding that growth almost entirely through loans from Indian banks. When fuel prices spiked and the aviation market tightened, the airline's revenue couldn't keep up with its debt obligations. Kingfisher Airlines grounded its final flight in 2012. Mallya was later declared a fugitive economic offender by Indian authorities, with unpaid loans to Indian banks exceeding $1.4 billion, and he has been fighting extradition proceedings from the United Kingdom for years. Markets move in cycles. That's not a theory, it's a historical constant. Betting an entire empire on the assumption that the cycle will never turn is one of the most common and most expensive mistakes in business history. Mistake number 6 is quieter than the others, but just as damaging. Failing to build a fortune that can survive without the person who built it. Many family fortunes don't collapse because of a single dramatic event. They erode over 1 or 2 generations because there was no real plan for who manages the wealth next, no independent oversight, and no separation between the founder's personal decisions and the business's financial structure. Research from institutions like the Williams Group, which has studied multi-generational wealth transfers for decades, has found that a significant majority of family fortunes are substantially diminished or lost by the 2nd or 3rd generation, most often due to poor communication, lack of preparation, and breakdowns in trust between family members, rather than bad investments alone. It's a slower kind of collapse than fraud or bankruptcy filings, but the end result is the same. A fortune that took a lifetime to build, gone within a generation or two, because the structure around it was never built to last. Now look closely at every case we've just covered. Ike Batista, over-leveraged on a single unproven asset. Sean Quinn, a concentrated bet with borrowed money. Alan Stanford, a fortune built on fraud. Patricia Klug, a lifestyle that outpaced sustainable income. Vijay Mallya, aggressive expansion at exactly the wrong point in the cycle. And countless family fortunes, lost simply from a failure to plan beyond 1 generation. The industries were different, the countries were different, the decades were different, but the underlying mistakes, almost identical every single time. Too much debt, too little diversification, cutting legal or ethical corners, living beyond even a billionaire's means, expanding without accounting for risk, and building no plan for what comes after. Losing $1 billion was never really about the money. It was about decisions made under pressure, under ego, or under the belief that the good times would never end. And that's really the lesson in all of this. Wealth doesn't fail because it's too small to protect. It fails because the decisions protecting it stop being disciplined. If you found this breakdown valuable, let me know in the comments which mistake surprised you the most, and subscribe for more real, fact-checked breakdowns of the biggest financial rises and falls in history. Thanks for watching.